This is June 8th, 2006. We're doing a oral history interview this morning with Skeet Vaughan. Skeet, we're delighted to have you here. I'm Chuck Lundquist. We like to start out by letting you tell a little bit about where you spent your boyhood, where you went to school, and how you got into the space program here in Huntsville.
Well, I was born in Seneca, South Carolina in 1929, and actually, I need to back up. Can I back up?
Sure.
Okay. I was born in Anderson, South Carolina in 1929, but we moved to Seneca, South Carolina. And there I went to school there, finished my high school training there, and I was the first pilot to solo at the Seneca Airport there, because I did that before I finished high school. I soloed on the 26th of April 1946 and graduated the following Monday there in Seneca. And then I went to Clemson, enrolled at Clemson A&M College, and working toward a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. And then I went ahead and got my degree and was in ROTC and was a distinguished military student there in ROTC, and entered the Air Force as a second lieutenant, and wanted to go into pilot.
What year was that?
That was 1951.
1951, all right.
And then I went into pilot training, was immediately on active duty in the Air Force in 1951, June 51, and stayed there until March of 53. And while in the Air Force, I was in pilot training, but had an air conditioning ground me and didn't get to finish my training in pilot training class 52G. And later on, I wound up in jet engine testing at the Oklahoma City Air Material Command there, testing jet engines for about till March of 53. And after March 53, I left the Air Force, stayed in reserve, however, and then went back to Clemson to work on my master's degree. And I worked on there my master's degree, and while going to school, I helped my father in the radio and TV business also. And then after that, I went to Eglin Air Force Base for my first job down there. And at Eglin Air Force Base in 55, I heard about the Vaughan Brown team coming up and working in Huntsville, Alabama. So I decided to go ahead and see if I could come to work in Huntsville, Alabama. So I transferred from my civil service job in Huntsville to the Army Ballistic Missile Agency here in Huntsville, and came here in October 56. And I stayed with the Vaughan Brown team until 1960, when we all transferred into NASA. And then I stayed with NASA until 1999.
What organization were you with in NASA?
I was in the atmosphere. At that time, it was called the Aerospace Environment Division. In the early phases, we had a number of different names over the years.
And what lab was that in?
I'm trying to remember. Well, actually, it was in the aeroballistics lab at the first, okay. And then we changed it to Aeroastrodynamics Laboratory name. And I worked for William Vaughan. Yeah. Bill Vaughan there. And my first job before that, though, was when I was at the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. I worked with Hans Paul. He was my boss, my first boss. And I was very fortunate to work with Hans, because while working on cooling system design work there at Army ABMA, he let me go back to graduate school to finish up my master's degree in mechanical engineering. So I went back to Clemson to finish my master's degree, and I got that in 59. And then, like I said, after that, we all transferred into NASA and worked on my early work in NASA basically was with the I can't think what it is, the atmospheric sciences area, but before that I worked in the area of flight evaluation work, and also was in aeroballistics lab. I was a project engineer for a while on the Atlas Agena program, and then the Atlas Centaur program for a while, and then part of the Apollo program as a project engineer for the Apollo program in the lab there. And later on, I decided I wanted to get into more interesting work, as I call it, because that was more of a management type deal. And being an engineer, I was more interested in engineering work. So I managed to get a job in the Aeroastrodynamics Laboratory, again with the lunar surface studies, environmental design criteria of the planets, the moon, the Earth, things like this. And so I began working in the area of lunar environment, and was able to be pretty good and get some information about the moon and develop a lot of design criteria for the lunar surface operations, which were used later in the design of the lunar rover. And then also worked a lot with the design of the lunar driving simulator there at Marshall to build a driving simulator for training the astronauts to work with the rover. And we did that, and we also did some work out in the field with the lunar rover out in Yuma, Arizona, test vehicles out there. We did that, and worked with the astronauts, the crews like that. And that was my mainly work in that part of NASA. And after the Apollo program was over, I wound up working in the Skylab program. And Skylab program, I did a lot of experiments in the Skylab program with the fluid mechanics experiments, student period experiments, things like that. And then later on...
Where were you attached during that period?
In that period of time, I was still in the Aeroastrodynamics at that point.
Okay.
I still worked for Bill Vaughan.
Mm-hmm.
And after the Skylab program, I wound up working toward the shuttle program. In the meantime, we were trying to develop for a flight experiment to go in the shuttle program, and that was called the Atmospheric Cloud Physics Program series. And we developed quite a bit of hardware for that, but we never got that program finished. And so later on, I came up with an idea that I wanted to do some research in atmospheric electricity or lightning research work, because being a pilot, I'm interested in thunderstorms. And I actually was able to work with Dr. Bernie Barnegut, and he was quite an expert in this area, and so we together came up with a project called the Nighttime Optical Survey of Lightning Experiment, called NOSL, and I was a co-investigator for that with him. And after that program, we flew that on STS-2, 4, and 6, and then we realized that the astronauts wouldn't have very much time to look for the lightning, so we conceived another program called the Mesoscale Lightning Experiment, and I was the principal investigator on that, and Dr. Vonnegut was my co-investigator, and Dr. Mark Brook was my other co-investigator. And I kept that going from 1981 till about 1999. We were very fortunate toward the end of 94, actually, we saw what's called the red Sprites and the blue jets. And that was a very interesting phenomenon. But however, I had known about those occurring above thunderstorms, but I'd never photographed them. And the reason...
How did you know about them earlier?
What happened is I was doing my work with the early U-2 program to get images looking down from space, or the U-2 looking down at the tops of thunderstorms, to get some idea of the amount of lightning, the flash rates, the frequency of lightning, how big the flashes were, how big they occurred over the top of the thunderstorms. And I was talking to one of the U-2 pilots one day about flying some night missions for me, because we've been flying mainly day missions. And he didn't really want to fly night missions too much with the U-2 because it's a very difficult airplane to fly. However, he told me, he said, I was flying over the Gulf of Tonkin in 1976 at night, and I came across, out in the distance, I saw a thunderstorm, a very large one, about my same altitude. And he said, I saw a lightning bolt go straight up about 50,000 to 100,000 feet above me. And he said, so that really piqued me a little bit. And he said, I was afraid about flying over the top of the storm. So that triggered me to go ahead and write an article in a magazine and say, have you seen any unusual lightning? I would really appreciate you to do that in one of the pilot magazines. And so I got about 19 reports of these unusual phenomena they'd seen, but they didn't want to talk about it. These were all retired pilots, and that's why they were talking about it now. And so I said, well, maybe we might see some of this stuff from space if we keep looking. So we continued our work looking straight down on the top of the storms. And one night I suggested to one of the controllers at JSC that let's take the cameras and move them up toward the horizon, to look toward the horizon to see what we can see out there. Well, in that process, we saw one of the flights, in STS-31, I think it was, we saw one of the two storms, and they were off in the distance. One was here and one was here. And this storm was fairly popping along, and this one was popping along. And this one you'd see it go like this, and then this would go. So we called that sympathetic lightning. We thought maybe they were talking to each other. Well, in the meantime, this storm on the left here, it was not very important. It didn't really treat my idea. So I began looking at my videotapes, and I noticed some unusual phenomena I'd seen on this particular storm. About that time, a fellow from University of Wisconsin, I think it was, can't think of his name right now, but anyway, he had actually photographed some stuff like this from the ground, and he called them pillars of sky, but pillars in the sky, but he didn't know what they were. So he sent me a copy of the videotape and said, have you seen anything like this? John Winkler was his name, actually, John Winkler. And he was flying a test vehicle, using a ground test with a camera. And he told me about this, sent me the videotape. I looked at it, and I said, John, I think I've seen the same thing from space. So sure enough, that's the way we wound up finding the red sprites and the blue jets. Now, they were black and white images when I saw them, and I went through about 19 hours of videotapes every frame to find these things. And I found about 19 of these images, and that was in 1989, I guess it was. And later on...
You were one of the first people to believe such things existed.
Yeah, right, yeah. And so we were just lucky enough, I say serendipitously, we were just lucky enough to be looking at the right place at the right time. And but I didn't have anything but black and white. And so I went to an AGU meeting and showed my videotapes to a person there, and that was Dr. Sentman from University of Alaska. And he had a low light level color TV camera, which he'd been looking at aurora. So I asked him if he could maybe fly that camera in some airplanes, and he said, well, if I can get some money out of headquarters, I will. I said, well, I can't get any money out of headquarters, so you try it. So he got some money out of headquarters, was able to fly around a thunderstorm in '94 with 2 Learjets, with a spectrometer and low light level color TV camera, and he got images in red, and we knew they were red because we had a spectrometer, and he's the one that coined the phrase the red sprites and the blue jets. And that was another phenomenon. The red sprites look like giant red jellyfishes with green tentacles hanging down. They occur about 95 kilometers above the top of the storms, and they have green tentacles hanging down, and they just suddenly appear there. And you'll see 4 or 5 of them sometimes in a row, or just one. But then what was most interesting was, as they flew around the storm in Arkansas there in '94, this storm was particularly severe. It was above 50,000 feet altitude. We know maybe 60,000 feet. And it had what they call the blue jets. And we saw 25 of these little blue jets squirting out the top of the storm itself, going up to about 35 kilometers, and we saw about 25 of those in a 25-minute period of time, and that really, as I say, was really the discovery. We had good data, and we knew about it, and it's been ever since. It's been very interesting to think about these things, but we still. We know now that the red sprites were probably caused by the fluorescence of the nitrogen gases in the upper atmosphere, but we do not know yet exactly what causes the blue jets. But we think it's something to do with probably some kind of plasma discharge coming up at the top of the storms. So that's about it.
Been lots of people looking at
lots of
these
people still
then.
looking at them since then, yeah. We've had a number of graduate students have used the data to get their master's and doctor's degrees so far.
Very active research
So it's
program.
been very active, yeah.
Now that was really pioneering work you did getting all that going.
To me it was fascinating because it's something extremely interesting and new, and we were doing a lot of stuff like that. But, you know, as I always say, I didn't have a job with NASA. I had a lot of fun because I was doing a lot of things, and I got to fly a lot. Like I said, back in the Space Lab program, Skylab program, I did a lot of my experiments in the Vaughan Comet airplane and flew a lot of zero-gravity parabolas and did my experiments and documented that. And so it just, a fascinating career.
Describe 1 or 2 of the experiments.
Well, one of the experiments we did was water drop dynamics. But before we did that, we built up a little facility called a drop dynamics facility, and we actually flew it in the KC-135. And basically what it consisted of was a hi-fi speaker with a rod attached to the speaker, and we had a little meniscus, a little container and a meniscus, and with a little needle on the end of that rod. And as a hi-fi speaker, I could control the velocity of the oscillation of the speaker, and with that it would pluck out a drop each time. And we had this in a little plastic box that had a video camera, had a 16 millimeter camera there. So we actually photographed this, and you could see the drops go out in zero gravity, and they would just sit out there like that, just pulse along. Whereas in regular gravity, they go down real quick to the ground. And we were trying to develop that for the atmospheric cloud physics program, to study the drop, oscillation of the water drop, the actual evaporation rate of the water drop, things of this sort, and actually the coalescence of the water drop, see if we could do that. So we had a lot of fun with that. And like I said, I have about 1,400 parabolas in a vomit comet that I flew, and never got sick, but come awful close a number of times. Many other guys got sick with me.
So the Skylab program was lots of fun then?
It was lots of fun too, yeah, it sure was, yeah. Well, actually, even the early Redstone stuff was a lot of fun, because like that, back in those days, I did a lot of work on the aerodynamic heating studies on Redstone. And we were interested in the amount of heat being introduced into the vehicle due to its movement through the atmosphere, which led later on to studies in the nose cone reentry stuff. So that was interesting also.
Well, what did you do after working on the shuttle experiments or the shuttle observations?
Well, I retired in '99, and now I'm still at home messing with my flight simulators and my computers and my 4 grandchildren, and I'm active in the Sons of American Revolution and that, and the Lieutenant Colonel in the Civil Air Patrol, and got a bunch of things I'm working on.
Well, you've been very interested in aircraft over your whole career.
Well, that's
Can you
right.
Comment on that a little bit?
Well, like I say, I wanted to be a pilot, and when I was just a young kid, and my daddy built model airplanes with me, and we had a flying club there in Seneca, South Carolina, called the Seneca Model Airplane Club, and we had a number of interesting people in that club. As a matter of fact, one of the guys was John J. Harper, who later on became a professor at Georgia Tech of aeronautical engineering. And I built model airplanes with John in 1939, my father and John. And John is a Clemson graduate also. So he also, while at Tech, he taught John Young aeronautics, and also taught Richard Tully, and he also taught Scott Horowitz, 3 of the astronauts.
Well, that's quite a
So
record.
I have a nice lineage to that line, and it worked out real nice, yeah. But like I say, I always wanted to be a pilot, and I had about 650 hours before I went to pilot training. I'd flown the PT-17 and the PT-22 Ryan and the Piper Cub and Super Cruiser and Taylor Craft and a number of those airplanes like that. And so I wanted to be, actually what I would love to have done if I had not had my air condition and was grounded, not able to fly. I would love to have been a test pilot. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get my engineering degree at Clemson. Go in the Air Force, go to test pilot school, become a test pilot, and eventually I hope to go into space, because Flash Gordon was my ideal back in the old days. I mean, he was a spaceman. So I really wanted to be a spaceman and never got to do it. But I got to some in the KC-135. That was a lot of fun playing around with it, and being in zero gravity, that kind of stuff. That was a lot of fun. Yeah.
You were just a passenger there.
I was test subject, yeah. Test subject and experimenter, yeah.
Well, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave for the people that are now trying to redo some of the things that you folks did when you were young?
Well, I think you just have to make up your mind you're going to try to do something and work at it and work toward it. And although you'll have some failures, you're still going to have to learn, because that's where you learn. If you learn by failures, if you don't have a failure, you don't know how close you've come to disaster. So you really have to work through the system and do that kind of stuff.
Any final thoughts you'd like to leave for the record?
Not right off the bat, no.
I take it you enjoyed your career.
Oh, it was not a job. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I had so much fun with it, and it was something I wanted to do, and not many people can say that about their careers, because, and I was very fortunate to have a good boss to let me work in a lot of different areas I wanted to work in, a number of different bosses, and I think I was very fortunate in that respect, yeah.
Well, very good, and thank you very much for coming in today. And
okay.
You'll soon be able to get a copy of this interview.
Okay. Yeah. All right.